The parking garage did not echo the way she expected it to. Sound usually bounced here. Footsteps, doors slamming, engines coughing awake. But now, everything felt swallowed. The concrete pillars stood too close, the ceiling too low, the air too thick, as if the space itself had decided to hold its breath. Angela Morris stood between two parked cars on level 2, her right hand resting against the cool metal of a sedan she did not recognize. Her fingers trembled, just enough to notice, not enough to explain. The collar of her blouse sat uneven on her neck, tugged slightly to one side, as if it had been adjusted in a hurry, or grabbed, or both. Her breathing had not yet found its rhythm again. Each inhale felt shallow, each exhale arrived late. The fluorescent lights above her buzzed without mercy, a thin electric hum that pressed against her skull and refused to let go. The light made everything look harsher than it was. Or maybe it simply revealed what had always been there. The stains on the concrete, the chipped paint on the walls, the way the space offered no softness anywhere. Angela did not move. She stared straight ahead, not at anything in particular, just past the elevator doors that were now closed. A moment ago, they had been open. A moment ago, voices had filled the garage. Sharp voices, certain voices, voices that did not bother lowering themselves because they had never needed to. Now those voices were gone, but their weight remained. By the time the voices faded, the damage was already permanent. The words drifted through her mind uninvited, settling into the space behind her eyes. She swallowed, slowly, carefully, as if swallowing too fast might bring something back up that she had already forced down. A heat rose in her chest. Not anger exactly, not fear either. Something quieter, something heavier. The familiar burn of humiliation that arrived when you realized you had been seen not as a person, but as a problem. She pressed her lips together until they ached. Angela was 47 years old. She had learned long ago how to stand still when the world expected her to shrink, how to hold her posture when her insides wanted to fold, how to keep her face neutral even when something inside her cracked. Still, the body remembers things the mind tries to forget. The slight shake in her hand betrayed her before she could stop it. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm chirped once, then went silent. The sound felt too loud, too sudden, like a slap in an already bruised room. Angela flinched despite herself. She hated that she did. The garage smelled faintly of oil and stale rain, a scent that clung to the back of her throat. She became acutely aware of how alone she was. No footsteps, no voices, no witnesses, just rows of parked vehicles and the relentless hum of artificial light. The kind of place where moments disappeared easily, where stories could be flattened into misunderstandings and filed away. Her phone was still in her hand, the screen dark now. She did not look at it. She already knew what time it was. She always knew. Time had a way of slowing after moments like this, stretching thin until seconds felt like minutes, and minutes felt like something you might never get back. Angela adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. The motion was small, controlled, a test more than a necessity. Everything still worked. Arms, legs, balance. She was intact. That mattered. Or at least it should have. What lingered was the question she had learned never to ask out loud. How quickly did it happen? Not the moment itself. That part was already blurred, softened by instinct. But the shift, the instant when she stopped being a woman walking through a public space and became something else. A suspicion, a threat, an inconvenience that needed to be handled. She had done nothing wrong. She knew that with the kind of certainty that did not need defending. And yet the certainty offered no comfort now. Lawfulness had never guaranteed safety. Decency had never guaranteed dignity. Angela leaned her forehead briefly against the cool metal of the car, just for a second, just long enough to let the chill ground her. She closed her eyes and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. The way she always did when she needed to pull herself back together. Above her, the fluorescent lights continued their steady hum. Indifferent, unmoved. Somewhere beyond the garage walls, the courthouse had already begun its morning routine. Doors opening, clerks arriving, hallways filling with purpose. Whatever had just happened here would not stop the day from moving forward. But it would not stay here either. Angela straightened slowly. Her expression settled into something calm. Not peace. Resolve comes later. This was simply control, the kind you gather piece by piece when you realize that what was taken from you will not be returned voluntarily. She glanced once more at the closed elevator doors. Something had gone very wrong in this garage, and whatever it was not finished. Angela Morris woke before the alarm, the way she always did. The sky outside her bedroom window was still dark, that quiet blue-gray that belonged only to early mornings and people who had places to be before the rest of the city noticed the day had started. She lay still for a moment, listening. No sirens, no neighbors, just the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the distant rush of traffic miles away. She swung her feet onto the floor and stood. 47 years old, joints stiff for a second before settling, body already trained to move on schedule. Discipline had a way of becoming instinct after enough years. In the kitchen, she poured black coffee into a chipped white mug that read, "Miami Strong." The mug had been a gift, ironic and earnest at the same time. She did not add sugar, never had. Sweetness like shortcuts made her uneasy. She turned on the local news and kept the volume low. Weather, traffic, a brief mention of a city council meeting no one would remember by noon. Familiar voices delivering familiar problems. All of it wrapped in the comfort of routine. Angela leaned against the counter and sipped her coffee slowly. There was safety in rules, in systems, in procedures that promised order even when the world felt messy. She had built her life around that belief, studied it, respected it, lived inside its lines. When people asked her why she trusted the process so much, she never knew how to answer without sounding naive. It wasn't faith, it was structure. If you did things the right way, if you followed the law, if you stayed calm and documented everything, the system would work the way it was supposed to. That belief had carried her through late nights, difficult conversations, rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. It had given her something solid to stand on when everything else felt negotiable. She checked her watch. Right on time. Angela dressed in the dark, careful not to wake the apartment. Cream blouse, navy slacks, sensible shoes. Her clothes were laid out the night before, aligned the way she liked them. Nothing wasted, nothing improvised. She applied a trace of lipstick by feel and smoothed her collar, already thinking 3 steps ahead of the day waiting for her. On her way out, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Price, a colleague she had worked alongside for years, running a little behind. Construction near the courthouse. "You might want to park in the public garage today." She paused, keys in hand. Daniel had said something else once, months earlier, during a conversation that had felt casual at the time. They were leaving a long meeting, tired and half joking about the day ahead, when he looked at her and said quietly, almost apologetically, "People don't always see the badge before they see the skin." She had smiled then, not because it was funny, but because acknowledging it felt like giving it power. "I know," she had replied, and walked away. Angela pushed the memory aside and locked her door. The drive to the courthouse was uneventful. The city was just beginning to stir. Delivery trucks idled at red lights. Joggers traced familiar routes along the sidewalks. The sun crept up behind the buildings, slow and unbothered. She merged into traffic with the ease of someone who had done this thousands of times before. When she arrived, the reserved parking lot was blocked off by orange cones and a temporary barrier. A sign taped to a metal stand read, "Temporary closure." She exhaled, irritation flickering briefly before dissolving into acceptance. Public garage it is. Angela turned the car toward the concrete structure across the street and pulled in without a second thought. She parked on level 2, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands resting on the steering wheel. The radio murmured in the background. Another traffic update. Another reminder that control was often an illusion dressed up as planning. She grabbed her bag and stepped out of the car. The garage was quiet. Too quiet she might have noticed if she had been looking for signs. Rows of parked vehicles, long concrete lanes, the smell of oil and dust. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. She adjusted her bag and started toward the elevator. It's just another morning, she told herself. Behind her, somewhere in the shadows between concrete pillars, headlights flickered on. The first thing Angela noticed was the sound of footsteps that did not match her own. They were heavier, more deliberate, not rushed, but not casual either. the kind of steps that assumed the space ahead would clear on its own. She did not turn right away. She had learned long ago that reacting too quickly could invite exactly the kind of attention she did not want. "Hey!" The word landed behind her, sharp enough to cut through the hum of the garage. Not a greeting, a summons. Angela slowed, then stopped. She turned, just enough to acknowledge the presence without surrendering the moment. The man approaching her was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a blue button-down shirt, tucked neatly into khaki pants. 61, maybe, the posture of someone who had spent his life being listened to, confidence worn like a uniform. Richard Hale. Angela did not know his name yet. She only knew the look, the measuring glance. The way his eyes traveled quickly over her clothes, her bag, her shoes, searching for something that would confirm whatever story he had already decided to tell himself. "This garage is for courthouse personnel," he said, voice firm, rising just enough to establish authority. "You can't be in here." Angela met his eyes. Not challenging, not apologetic, just present. "I'm walking to the elevator," she replied. "You're standing in my way." It was not what he expected. Richard blinked once, then let out a short laugh. Not amused, surprised, the kind of laugh that came when someone did not play their assigned role. "I asked you a question," he said, stepping closer. The distance between them narrowed, subtly, intentionally. "Do you have business here?" Angela felt the shift in the air. The way the space tightened, the way the silence grew heavier with each second. "I do," she said evenly. "What kind of business?" he pressed. "The kind that doesn't require your approval." Behind him, a car door closed. Another presence joined the scene. A woman stood a few steps back, clutching a large designer purse against her chest. Linda Hale watched them with wide eyes and a tight mouth, her gaze flicking between Angela and her husband. "Richard," Linda said quietly at first, "maybe we should just go." Richard did not look at her. "You see the sign anywhere?" he asked Angela, gesturing vaguely toward a concrete pillar. "Authorized access only. This isn't a place to wander around." Angela glanced briefly toward the sign he meant. She had already read it. She always read signs. Words mattered. "Court visitors are allowed," she said. "It's early, but it's open." Richard's jaw tightened. His voice rose another notch, just enough to signal that patience was wearing thin. "You don't belong here," he said. The words settled between them, heavy and familiar. Angela felt the old instinct tug at her. Step back, smile, de-escalate, make it easier for everyone else. She ignored it. "I'm not going to argue with you," she said calmly. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Linda shifted behind him, unease sharpening into something performative. "She's being hostile," Linda said, louder now. "I don't feel safe." Angela turned her head slightly, acknowledging Linda for the first time. "I haven't raised my voice," she said. "I haven't moved toward you. I'm standing still." Richard took another step forward. "This is how you keep order," he said, as if explaining something obvious. "You don't let things slide. You don't ignore red flags." Angela's heartbeat thudded once hard, then steadied. She did not reach for her phone. She did not step back. She did not argue. She stood her ground. Linda's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Her breathing quickened, eyes darting as if searching for confirmation of the danger she was now convinced existed. "Richard," she said again, sharper this time. "I'm calling the police." Angela watched her pull out her phone. For a brief moment, something flickered across Richard's face. Not doubt, something closer to satisfaction, the quiet certainty that the situation was finally moving in the direction he understood. Angela opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. This was the moment. Not loud, not violent, just a line being crossed by choice. Linda raised the phone to her ear. Richard remained where he was, close enough now that Angela could smell coffee on his breath. Neither of them asked another question. Neither of them listened. They had already decided who she was, and with that decision, something small and seemingly harmless slipped beyond reach, into a place where it could never be taken back. The call connected faster than Linda expected. 911. "What is your emergency?" Linda did not hesitate. Her voice came out tight, rehearsed without ever having been practiced. Fear shaped carefully into something convincing. "There's a woman in the courthouse parking garage," she said. "Level 2. She won't leave. She's acting aggressive." Angela watched her speak, watched the words take shape in the air, and then harden into something official, a story that no longer belonged to the truth, but to whoever got there first. Richard stayed silent while his wife talked. He did not interrupt, did not correct her. He stood with his shoulders squared, his presence filling the narrow space between Angela and the elevator, like a barrier that did not need to be touched, to be felt. "She's refusing to explain why she's here," Linda continued. "My husband tried to help, but she's not cooperating." Angela felt a familiar pressure settle behind her eyes. Not panic. Not yet. Something colder. The knowledge that the room had tilted, and there was no easy way to level it again. She could have spoken up, could have raised her voice, could have pulled out her phone and told her own version of the story into the same line Linda now occupied. She did none of those things. Angela chose stillness. Not because she was afraid, but because she believed restraint would matter later, because she believed that calm was evidence, because she believed that if she did not give them anything sharp to hold on to, the system would see what was happening for what it was. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said through Linda's phone, faint but audible. "Is she threatening you?" Linda glanced at Angela, eyes wide, searching. "She's standing." "There," Linda said. "She won't move. She has an attitude." Richard shifted slightly, just enough to close the gap further. Not touching, not yet, but close enough to assert control, close enough to make the space feel smaller than it was. Angela met his gaze. "You need to step aside," she said quietly. "I'm going to the elevator." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. His voice dropped, lower now, more controlled, more dangerous in its certainty. "You don't get to decide that," he said. "Not here." Behind him, Linda turned her body slightly away, phone still pressed to her ear. Her fear had already done its work. It had become permission. Angela felt the weight of the moment settle fully now. The narrowing options. The way every choice carried consequence, even the ones that felt right. She stayed where she was. Not defiant, not passive, just present. This was not about rage, not about cruelty. It was about a belief so deeply ingrained it felt invisible. That suspicion was responsibility. That confrontation was protection. That hostility, when dressed up as concern, was justified. Richard believed he was doing the right thing. Linda believed she was keeping herself safe. Neither of them stopped to wonder what it meant that their safety required Angela to be something less than human. The elevator chimed somewhere nearby, a soft sound swallowed by the concrete. The doors opened and closed again without them. Linda's call continued. Names were taken, descriptions given, each word another step away from any outcome that could be undone. Angela felt it then. Not fear, but certainty. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a decision. A small one, maybe. A few words spoken, a phone call made, a refusal to listen when listening was still possible. But some lines, once crossed, do not wait for permission to take their toll. And as the headlights behind them remained on, flooding the garage with harsh white light, Angela understood that whatever came next would follow all of them far beyond this place. The story reached the building before Angela did. By the time she stepped through the courthouse doors, the air inside felt different. Not louder, not openly hostile, just slightly off, like a room where a conversation had stopped a second too late. She sensed it in the way heads lifted, then turned away, in the way voices lowered when she passed. A suspicious woman in the courthouse garage. The words did not appear on a screen or in an email. They moved the way these things always did. Quietly, through glances, through half sentences, through the spaces between what people said and what they meant. Angela felt it immediately. At the security checkpoint, the guard greeted her with the same polite tone he used for everyone else. "Good morning, ma'am." But his eyes lingered a beat longer than usual, just long enough to register her face, to connect it to something he had already heard. She handed over her bag. The search was thorough, professional, unnecessarily slow. "Everything okay?" she asked calmly. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. His smile was practiced. His distance was real. Inside the building, the halls buzzed with routine. Clerks moved files from one desk to another. Attorneys checked their phones. Conversations continued as if nothing had happened. And yet, something had shifted. Angela passed two colleagues she had known for years. One offered a nod instead of their usual greeting. The other smiled without warmth, her eyes flicking briefly toward Angela's bag before moving on. It was subtle, enough to be denied if named. enough to hurt if felt. She kept walking. In an elevator packed with strangers, she stood near the back, her reflection staring back at her from the mirrored wall. She looked the same posture, same calm expression, but she could feel the tension humming beneath her skin, a quiet vibration that refused to settle. When the doors opened, conversations resumed immediately, as if her presence had been the only thing holding them back. Later that morning, her phone buzzed. "You okay?" Her brother Marcus texted. She hesitated before responding. "Yeah." "Why?" There was a pause. Longer this time. Someone called Mom. Said there was an incident at the courthouse. Said your name came up. Angela closed her eyes. "Did you do something wrong?" Marcus asked. The words were careful, afraid of the answer. The question landed harder than anything else that day. "No," she typed back. "I didn't." Another pause. "Okay," Marcus replied, "just checking." But the doubt lingered, not because he did not trust her, but because he knew the world they lived in. He knew how quickly stories changed shape once they left the mouths that created them. Across town, Richard Hale leaned back in his office chair, phone pressed to his ear. "It's nothing," he said, waving off the concern in his wife's voice. Security handled it. Linda sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, her earlier nerves already dulling into something more comfortable. "I just don't want this turning into a thing," she said. "It won't," Richard replied. "I know people down there. They'll sort it out." And he believed it. Men like Richard always did. They had spent their lives watching situations smooth themselves over, watching inconvenience turn into apologies, watching the right version of a story win by default. To him, what had happened in the garage was already fading, shrinking into a footnote. A woman had been questioned, authorities were notified, order was restored. That was the version he would tell himself. Back in the courthouse, Angela sat alone at her desk, staring at a file she had already read twice without absorbing a word. The sense of injustice sat heavy in her chest, tangled with anger she did not yet allow herself to name. She was not ashamed, but she was tired of having to prove it. The first wave of consequences had arrived quietly. No accusations, no confrontations, just the slow erosion of trust. The subtle reminder that once a certain story took hold, it did not need evidence to survive. And as Angela lifted her head and met the eyes of another passerby who looked away too quickly, she understood that this was only the beginning. By the afternoon, the politeness had hardened into distance. Angela noticed it in the way questions were framed around her instead of to her, in the way a clerk paused mid-sentence when she approached, then restarted with a different tone, careful and clipped, in the way a supervisor stopped by her desk, not to ask what had happened, but to remind her about documentation protocols and incident reports, as if she had already failed some unspoken test. "Just standard procedure," he said, eyes fixed on a point just over her shoulder. "You understand." Angela nodded. She always understood. What she did not understand was how quickly. The room had decided who needed explaining and who did not. At lunch, she sat alone in the break room, stirring soup she barely tasted. A television mounted in the corner murmured local headlines, construction delays, budget meetings. Nothing about her, nothing that would make this official. That was almost worse. Official things could be addressed. Whispered things had a way of burrowing in. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother. "I heard something," her mother said without preamble. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Angela replied. Another pause. Softer now. "You know how people talk," her mother said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Angela closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said again, slower this time, saying it felt necessary, saying it felt insufficient. "I know," her mother replied. "I know you." But even that reassurance came wrapped in concern, in the knowledge that knowing someone did not always protect them. Across the city, Richard Hale stood in a sunlit conference room, laughing with two men he had known for decades, coffee cups on the table, blueprints spread out, business as usual. "Some lady caused a scene at the courthouse this morning," one of them said casually. Security was all over it. Richard shrugged. "People get bold these days." Linda later told her sister the same version, lowered voice, concerned expression. "It was uncomfortable," she said. "You just never know anymore." Each retelling shaved off more of Angela's humanity and replaced it with something vague and unsettling. A shape that could hold fear without facts. A story that required no follow-up. Back at her desk, Angela finally closed the file she had been pretending to read. Her chest felt tight now, the anger rising in waves she forced herself to keep contained. She knew this feeling, the mix of humiliation and fury that came from being misunderstood in a way that could not be corrected with truth alone. She had been calm. She had been careful. She had trusted the process. And still, the weight of someone else's hostility now sat squarely on her shoulders. Angela gathered her things and stood. As she walked down the hallway, she caught her reflection in the glass of an office door. Her posture was straight, her face composed, but her eyes looked older than they had that morning. This was the first cost. Not the loud kind, not the kind that left bruises you could point to. This was the cost of being seen through a story you did not write. And as she stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, Angela felt it clearly now. The unease, the simmering resentment, the confusion that came from knowing she had done everything right and still been marked as wrong. Richard and Linda believed the moment had passed. Angela knew better. The first wave had only just reached shore. The paperwork arrived before the apology ever could. Angela found it waiting in her inbox the next morning, flagged as time-sensitive. Forms, attachments, instructions written in careful, bloodless language. If you wish to proceed, if applicable, if substantiated. Each sentence designed to sound neutral while quietly shifting the burden onto her shoulders. She read everything, twice. The complaint process was not a straight line. It was a maze built by people who never expected anyone to finish it. Dates had to be recalled with precision. Statements had to be written without emotion. Supporting evidence had to be requested through the very system that had already decided this was inconvenient. She sat at her desk late into the evening, typing and retyping the same paragraph, aware of how easily the wrong word could be used to undermine her. Too angry, and she would sound unstable. Too calm, and she would sound detached. She needed to be credible in exactly the right way. When she finally hit submit, there was no confirmation, no reassurance, just silence. Over the next few days, doors that had always been open began to close quietly. Meetings were postponed. Emails went unanswered longer than usual. A supervisor she trusted stopped by her office and leaned against the door frame instead of stepping inside. Off the record, he said gently, "You might want to think about letting this go." Angela looked up from her computer. Why? He hesitated. Because these things get messy, and people remember who makes them messy. Another colleague tried a different approach, sympathy wrapped in caution. "I believe you," she said softly, "but is it worth the stress? You've worked too hard to put a target on your back. Let it go. It's not worth it." Angela heard the phrase everywhere now, in well-meaning advice, in worried voices, in pauses that spoke louder than words. What no one said out loud was what it would cost her not to. At night, the exhaustion followed her home. Sleep came in fragments. Her mind replayed conversations she wished she had handled differently, moments she wished she could rewind just far enough to change the outcome. The humiliation lingered longer than the anger, the sense of being exposed in a place she had always believed was safe. Across town, Richard Hale sat in his home office, staring at his phone. He had expected a call by now, a quiet assurance that everything had been handled, that the situation was resolved. Instead, there was only delay, silence from people who usually returned his messages within minutes. "Why hasn't anyone gotten back to us?" he asked Linda for the third time that night. Linda did not answer immediately. She was seated at the dining table, laptop open, scrolling through articles and legal forums she barely understood. "There's more to this," she said finally. "I think there's more." Richard frowned. It was nothing, just a misunderstanding. Linda turned the screen toward him. "They're pulling the 911 recording," she said. "The dispatcher told me it gets archived, and the garage has cameras, and someone saw us." The words hung in the air between them. Richard felt a tightening in his chest he did not like, a shift from irritation to something closer to unease. "Everyone has cameras," he said, dismissive but slower now. "That doesn't mean anything." Linda closed the laptop. "It means it's not just our story anymore," she said. For the first time since the garage, Richard wondered if the situation had moved beyond his control. Not dramatically, not yet, but enough to feel it slipping, inch by inch. Back at her apartment, Angela sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, staring at an unread message from an unknown number. She did not open it yet. The process was working exactly as it had been designed to: slow, draining, isolating. And the deeper she went, the clearer it became that this was no longer just about what had happened in the garage. It was about whether she was willing to endure what came next. The message finally came through at midnight. Unknown number. We need to talk. This is getting bigger than you think. Angela stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone face down on the nightstand. She did not respond. Not yet. She had learned that urgency was rarely neutral. Someone always benefited from it. By the end of the week, the complaint process had grown teeth. She was asked to clarify timelines she had already clarified, to restate facts she had stated plainly, to explain why she felt threatened, as if threat were something that required permission. Each follow-up email arrived polite and impersonal, ending with the same phrase: "Thank you for your cooperation." It sounded less like gratitude and more like a test. One afternoon, she was called into a meeting she had not requested. The room was small, windowless. Two administrators sat across from her with notepads open and faces carefully arranged. "We just want to understand," one of them said, "why you feel this needs to escalate." Angela folded her hands in her lap. "Because it already has," she replied. The second administrator glanced up. "Escalation brings attention. Attention brings scrutiny. Not everyone comes out of that unscathed." Angela held his gaze. Neither do people who stay quiet. The meeting ended without resolution. No promises, no next steps. Just another reminder that the system moved best when nothing challenged its balance. She left feeling hollowed out. The fatigue had settled into her bones now. Not the kind that sleep fixed, the kind that came from carrying something heavy alone. Across the city, Linda Hale sat on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by papers she had printed and didn't understand. Terms jumped off the pages at her. Evidence preservation, third-party witnesses, internal review. She played the 911 call again, wincing at the sound of her own voice. "She's acting aggressive." The words sounded different now, sharper, smaller. "What if they hear it wrong?" she asked Richard, panic creeping into her tone. "What if they think I lied?" Richard paced the room. His confidence had thinned into irritation, then into something closer to fear. "I didn't touch her," he said. "I didn't do anything." "You don't know what the cameras show," Linda shot back. "You don't know who saw us." Richard stopped pacing. "We'll call Tom," he said finally. "He knows people. He'll tell us what to do." But when Tom did call back, his voice was cautious, in a way Richard had never heard before. "You might want a lawyer," Tom said, "just in case." That was when it hit him. Not like a blow, like a slow realization settling in his chest. This was no longer something he could smooth over with familiarity and connections. The story had escaped him. It was moving on its own now, shaped by recordings and footage and people who had no reason to protect him. Linda pressed her hands to her face. "I just wanted to feel safe," she whispered. Back in her apartment, Angela finally picked up her phone and opened the message she had ignored. Unknown. Number. "They're pulling the footage. You should be prepared." Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with clarity. Prepared meant witnesses, records, versions of events that no longer relied on belief. It meant that what had been framed as a misunderstanding was about to be measured against reality. She typed a single reply. "Angela, I am." She set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The exhaustion was still there, the isolation too, but beneath it, something steadier had taken root. Richard and Linda were beginning to feel the pressure of a system they had assumed would work in their favor. Angela had been living under that pressure her entire life. The difference now was that she had stopped absorbing it quietly. The second wave of consequences did not crash all at once. It seeped in, through paperwork, through sleepless nights, through the slow understanding that nothing about this would be quick or clean. And somewhere between the silence and the strain, Angela realized the truth she could no longer ignore. This was not just a process she had entered. It was a test of how much she was willing to endure to be seen. The truth surfaced quietly, not in a courtroom, not in a headline, not with raised voices or dramatic entrances. It arrived the way uncomfortable truths often do, through paperwork, routine, and a moment no one thought mattered. Richard Hale learned first. He was sitting in his attorney's office, hands folded, jaw tight, listening to a tone he had never heard directed at him before, careful, measured, no reassurance tucked between the lines. "We've reviewed the incident," the attorney said, eyes scanning a file. "The woman involved is not simply a court visitor." Richard leaned forward. "What does that mean?" It took a moment before the words landed. "She works within the justice system." The room seemed to shrink. Richard blinked, then scoffed softly, a reflex more than a belief. "So she's staff, a clerk. That doesn't change anything." The attorney looked up. "She's not administrative staff." Silence stretched between them. Richard felt something shift in his chest, not fear, something colder, recognition, arriving too late to be useful. "She has standing," the attorney continued, "professional credibility, institutional access, which means this isn't about her wandering somewhere she didn't belong." Richard swallowed. "It's about what happened when you decided she didn't." For the first time since the garage, the story Richard had been telling himself fractured. He had framed the morning as vigilance, as responsibility, as doing what needed to be done. But now the pieces rearranged themselves into something harder to ignore. He had not been protecting order. He had enforced a boundary that existed only in his mind, and by doing so, he had activated the very system he believed he controlled. Across town, Angela Morris sat alone at her kitchen table, a single lamp casting soft light across scattered documents. Her hands were steady now, but her thoughts were not. She had known this moment would come, had prepared for it, in theory. Still, knowing and feeling were not the same. She was no longer being treated as a problem to be managed. The tone had changed. Emails were answered faster. Meetings were scheduled with urgency instead of delay. Words like procedure and protocol were suddenly paired with accountability. The system was paying attention, and that realization did not bring relief. It brought clarity. Angela leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. She had done everything right that morning. Followed the rules, stayed calm, trusted that correctness would protect her. It hadn't. Not. Until the system realized she could not be dismissed without consequence. The realization settled heavy in her chest. Law did not move on morality alone. It moved when pressure forced it to, when silence broke, when someone refused to disappear quietly. Angela thought about the moment in the garage, how she had chosen not to raise her voice, not to call anyone, not to escalate. She had believed restraint was strength. Now she understood its cost. Impatience buzzed beneath her skin. Edged with anger, she no longer tried to soften. Not rage, something sharper, something earned. Across the city, Linda Hale sat on the edge of her bed, phone clutched in her hand, scrolling through updates she barely understood. Names, titles, implications. "She's not just some woman," Linda whispered. Richard said nothing. The silence between them felt different now. Heavier, no longer protective, but accusatory. They had not uncovered a threat. They had created one. Not because Angela was dangerous, but because their hostility had given the system no choice but to respond. Angela closed her folder and stared at the blank wall ahead of her. The truth had finally stepped into the light, but it was not the truth she had expected to learn. It was this. The law does not protect those who are right. It protects those who are seen. And silence is never neutral. Silence is a decision, and it almost always sides with power. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in waves. Quiet ones, personal ones, the kind that don't make the evening news but hollow out a life all the same. Richard Hale lost control first. Not dramatically, not publicly, just steadily, piece by piece. It started with the phone calls that stopped coming back. The contractor who said he'd call next week and never did. The city inspector who suddenly needed additional documentation. The banker who smiled too politely and suggested they revisit the loan terms later. Later became never. At a Rotary Club luncheon he had attended for 20 years. Richard felt it before anyone said a word. Conversation slowed when he approached. Jokes ended early. Someone checked their phone mid-sentence. A man he'd once sponsored for membership leaned in and whispered, "It's probably nothing, Richard, just bad timing." Richard nodded, thanked him, and finished his drink alone. At home, the house felt different. Linda noticed it more than he did. Friends stopped inviting her to book club. The woman who used to sit beside her at church chose a different pew. A neighbor waved, then remembered something urgent and turned away. Linda replayed the 911 call in her head at night. Her own voice. High, tight, certain. She's acting suspicious. The words sounded foreign now. Reckless. She tried to tell herself it was all exaggerated, that people would move on, that this would pass like everything else, but it didn't. The recording existed. The footage existed. Witnesses existed. Truth has weight. And once it lands, it doesn't float away. Richard met with his attorney again, this time without the confidence he once carried like a second suit. There will be penalties, the attorney said carefully. Civil consequences, possibly criminal, but more than that. He paused. Your name will follow this, not as a charge, as a reputation. Richard looked down at his hands, the same hands that had built a company, the same hands that had believed authority was instinctive. What if we settle? Richard asked quietly. Make it right. The attorney didn't answer immediately. You can't settle what already happened, he said. You can only live with it. Linda cried in the car afterward, not loud, not dramatically, just tears that kept coming, soaking into the sleeves of her sweater. This wasn't supposed to happen, she said. We were just trying to be safe. Richard stared through the windshield. I know. But he also knew something else now. Safety, when built on hostility, always demands payment. Angela Morris paid a different price. Hers was not measured in headlines or apologies. It was measured in nights she lay awake replaying moments that no longer fit who she thought she was. She had not emerged victorious. She had emerged changed. Doors reopened, but not easily. Some colleagues were warmer now, almost deferential. Others avoided eye contact entirely. She noticed who spoke up for her and who stayed silent when it mattered. She noticed everything. Angela returned to work with a posture that looked the same but felt different inside. She no longer assumed protection. She no longer confused procedure with justice. People asked her if it was worth it. She never answered quickly. One evening, her brother sat across from her at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. I thought doing everything right was enough, he said. I really did. Angela nodded. So did I. She did not feel triumphant. She felt heavier, older, more awake. She had not defeated anyone, but she had refused to disappear. And that refusal had a cost. For Richard and Linda, the cost was losing things they had never imagined could be taken. Trust, access, the comfort of being assumed correct. For Angela, the cost was innocence, but she would pay it again, because now she understood something that could not be unlearned. Justice does not arrive because it is deserved. It arrives because someone stays standing long enough to force it through the door. The final price was not punishment. It was truth. And no one involved walked away unchanged. Life did not reset for Angela Morris. It continued. Mornings still came early. Coffee still brewed in silence. The radio still murmured local news she half listened to while watching the sky lighten through the kitchen window. On the surface, very little had changed. Underneath, everything had. Angela moved through her days with a new awareness, one that never fully switched off. She noticed who felt entitled to space and who learned to shrink. She noticed how quickly assumptions formed, how casually suspicion was handed out, how often hostility wore the disguise of responsibility. She noticed herself too. The woman who once believed rules were shields was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, steadier, less willing to confuse order with fairness. Work continued. Files crossed her desk. Conversations happened in hallways, some sincere, some cautious. People still asked how she was doing. I'm fine, she would say. And it was mostly true. Not happier, not lighter, but clearer. Angela understood now that hostility does not vanish just because it is ignored. It does not dissolve when wrapped in polite language or justified by fear. It settles. It gathers weight. It waits for permission. Richard and Linda Hale learned that lesson too, though not in ways they would ever speak about openly. Their world did not collapse. It narrowed. They lived inside smaller rooms now, shorter conversations, thinner trust. Their names carried an echo that followed them into spaces where they once felt invisible and protected. No one shouted at them. No one needed to. Silence can be loud when it knows exactly why it is there. Angela never celebrated what happened. She did not frame it as a victory. She framed it as a warning, to herself most of all. She knew now that the system did not bend toward justice on its own. It bent when pushed, when challenged, when someone refused to absorb harm quietly to make others comfortable. She carried that knowledge forward, not as armor, but as weight, the kind that keeps your feet planted when the ground shifts. One evening, months later, Angela walked through the same public parking garage. Different day, different cars, same fluorescent lights. Nothing happened, and yet everything did. She paused for a moment, breathed in the familiar concrete air, then kept walking. Some mistakes don't chase you immediately. They wait until escape is no longer possible.